Hi, Dr. Hill. This is Precious, and this is my Ratatouille commentary. Yeah, so the main three things that I focus on Ratatouille was symbolism, identity. Symbolism, I tied it to identity, cultural context, and emotional connotative. So when it came to symbolism, I chose identity because it's actually one of the most crucial part of the movie. You have Remy, the rat, and you have Linguini, the chef. So Linguini started off as, just someone who needed a job, and he wasn't necessarily sure that he wanted to cook. He didn't know what he wanted to do. He just needed a job, and so he got a job as a garbage boy. But some things happen, as you would know, and he ended up making this really good soup. Him and Remy, Remy came into the play, and they ended up making this really good soup that intrigued one of the food critics in the earlier part of the movie. So now, this all goes into say with Linguini's identity. He Food is not part of his identity as much, because if we watch the movie, we realize that if not for Remy, the food that the food critic enjoyed wouldn't have came out as good as it did, right? So we can all conclude that being a chef is not part of Linguini's purpose, and that's what Linguini was on the search for. Even in the movie, he said it himself. He said that no one has ever expected anything of him, so he's never felt any pressure, and that just goes to show that throughout his life, he's just been living in survival mode, and especially after his mom died, it increased because now there's really no one to put pressure on him, which is why his identity kind of was really shifted and rocky when Remy came into the story and he was cooking and Remy was helping him cook and all that good stuff. It was just a very tricky thing for him. So at this point, it was his identity was very much, what's the word? He was finding it, basically. He was finding his identity. And he ended up at the end, in my point of view, my perspective, I'd say he did find it, because he realized that the kitchen was not for him and he was better off serving people in another way, right? So, and which is okay. And the second identity I want to talk about is Remy. Remy's identity consists of him being a rat and someone who loves to cook. So, being a rat and a cook. He constantly had to choose. You see, there was a moment in the movie where he had to choose between his family, going back to his family. I forgot what they called it, but like it was a whole bunch of them. Going back to his family or staying with Linguini and helping him cook. But then later on, we see that he ends up picking Linguini and going back to be the chef, right? So with that, he struggled on balancing the two of them, because especially with his dad in his ear telling him that he's just a rat, rats don't belong in the human world, all that good stuff. Rats don't belong in a human world, and there's really nothing much that can come out of it. All of that took a really good punch at his identity and self-worth, and trying to figure out, how much do I really love cooking and how much do I really love my family, or do I love one more than the other? But in the end, we see his family coming together to support him, and he realized that he is both. He's not just a rat, he's not just a cook, he's actually both. He's a rat who cooks, which is, can I just say that watching this movie is actually kind of crazy, because writers have a certain power over their audience. And with the writer of Ratatouille, they were able to make us, the audience, the watchers, right? They were able to make us, some of us at least, connect with a rat. A lot of people will be able to connect with the fact that they're struggling to find their identity, or they're struggling to choose between two parts of themselves, when really those two halves of themselves come together to make a whole, so they don't have to choose. But I just find it crazy how a lot of people will resonate with a rat. Yeah, that's all I'm gonna say. And also, a rat was cooking. Okay, the second thing I would like to talk about is cultural context. So, the whole point of the movie was about this dish named Ratatouille, right? Ratatouille was originated in the region of Nice in the 18th century. It was invented by poor farmers because they needed to stretch out their food, to like, what was it? They needed to stretch out their food during the summertime so it could fit their budget. So they just came up with ratatouille, and ratatouille literally means, I think, like stare, and then like, yeah, to stare and then sauce, something like that. So they just came up with it, and it helped them to, stretch out their meals so they wouldn't have to spend as much, or they wouldn't have to waste anything, because these were people that were poor, which is why it has the negative connotative behind it, called the peasant's meal, right? Or the peasant's stew. And also, but even though it has a negative connotative to it, about it being food for poor people, I think that they're like, them being able to wanting to stretch out the food that they have. And I read, while I was doing some research on it, and I read that they had a lot of abundance. So yes, it does have a negative the name does have a negative connotative to it, but I think it's good that they were, but I also think there's a positive sense in that they were rich in produce, they're rich in vegetables, plants, and all that good stuff. And I think that's a way to bring some good and a bad light. And I also love the fact that in the end, rats ended up making the food. I don't like, which kind of speaks to it being called a peasant's dish, because realistically, who's eating something that a rat made? Does that make sense? Like, who's gonna eat? Like, if a rat was to cook for me, right? I don't even like rats. Like, I scream at the sight of them, right? I run away from bugs. Rats, insects, bugs, I run away from all of them. So realistically, who is letting a mosquito or a rat or a moth cook for them? You know what I'm trying to say? So the fact that at the end, rats were the ones who were like the building block of the ratatouille dish, I think it speaks more to the name, or like at least the meaning of the name, the peasant's stew or the peasant's dish. It just speaks more meaning to the name and adds like a little bit of razzle dazzle. And this also shows that food is not just food, it's actually part of someone's culture, and it's also part of a lot of people's history, which leads me to my last point, is that this movie also portrayed an emotional connotative at the end. At the end, the meal, ratatouille, was really good. So good to the point that Ego, the fruit critic, he tasted it and it made him emotional. It brought him back to when he was a little boy and he was crying and his mother used food to comfort him, right? This just goes to show you that food is more than just food. Food is used to tell a story. It's used to tell people's culture. It's used to tell someone's identity. It's used to tell someone's passion. It's used to tell someone's personality. And it's also used to tell the history of a lot of people. Like, think about it. I'm pretty sure in your family, or in your friend's family, they have like little special dishes that is passed down from generation to generation. That's an example of food telling a story for a long period of time until that generation dies. Until that generation dies, that food, that special cuisine, that recipe is going to keep being passed down from generation to generation. And that's just an example of how food is more than just food, and how food really does invoke an emotional response in human beings. And it's also a way to keep loved ones close. A lot of people, when they miss, sorry, I got cut off from the previous video, but honestly, I'm wrapping up. I was just gonna say my last few point was, a lot of people, when they miss like their grandma, their aunt, boyfriend, husband, whatever, mom, one thing that you usually hear them say is, I miss my mother, I miss my grandmother, so I decided to make this dish that reminds me of so and so. So all that just goes to tie in that food is indeed emotional, it's very personal, and it's more than just food. And I think this whole movie showed us that food is also cultural, and food definitely does have a background, and it's very much personal. So I'm Precious Bassam, and this was my commentary on Ratatouille. Bye, and have a good night, day, or afternoon whenever you're watching this. Bye.